Have you heard about Chernobyl, right? But what few people know is that the government hid such disturbing information that, to this day, many are unaware of the true horrors of that tragedy. Did you know that Chernobyl's radiation didn't just stay in the skies? It reached the food you would consume. Today, you will discover secrets that were buried by time, and that may completely change the way you see this disaster. But what you may not know is the first secret: government omissions. The Soviet government, known for its obsession with secrecy, used all its apparatus to suppress the damage caused by the Chernobyl disaster. From the beginning, the goal was to minimize the impact of the event, both for the internal population and for the rest of the world. And for that, they did everything to hide what really happened. Initial denial. After the reactor explosion, local authorities tried to downplay the situation, claiming that the incident was under control. The population of Pripyat was kept uninformed about the real risks of radiation for over 36 hours, while children played exposed to radioactive particles. European reaction. The truth about the accident began to emerge when sensors in Sweden detected elevated radiation, leading the Soviet government to reluctantly acknowledge what had really happened. The government's priority was to protect its international image rather than save lives, resulting in deadly silence in the first hours of the disaster. Firefighters' sacrifice. Firefighters were the first to face the crisis, unaware of the severity of the situation and without adequate protection against radiation. Many quickly showed severe symptoms, and even after their deaths, the government tried to cover up the cause, citing other conditions, while families received little compensation. But the worst was yet to come. Now let's delve into one of the most macabre secrets of all: the contaminated meat secret. After the explosion in Chernobyl, the health consequences were not limited to the radiation spreading through the air. The devastating effects extended to the food chain and, worse, to what the Soviet authorities allowed to be consumed by the population. Radioactive milk. After the disaster, the Soviet government, to avoid panic, decided to distribute milk produced by cows grazing in irradiated areas, without any sanitary control. This contaminated milk was widely consumed, especially by children, who were the most vulnerable to radiation. Exported products. Besides milk, the government allowed meat, vegetables, and fruits from areas affected by the disaster to be sent to other regions of the Soviet Union. The population was not warned about the contamination, which worsened the public health risk. Polluted water. Rivers and lakes near the plant were also contaminated, but the consumption of this water continued unchecked. Even decades after the disaster, some water sources still show high radiation levels, affecting the health of people who consumed it. Health impact. Over time, it became evident that radiation consumed through food and water did not disappear with cooking, accumulating in bodies and leading to diseases like cancer and leukemia. Many victims never knew the cause of their conditions until the truth was revealed, leaving a tragic and lasting legacy. And the big question remains: how many people were affected by this macabre secret without ever knowing it? Let's talk about another absolutely terrifying aspect: the exposed workers. After the Chernobyl disaster, a true workforce was mobilized to try to contain the damage, clean the area, and prevent the radiation from spreading further. These workers were known as liquidators. They were ordinary people, many of them farmers or industrial workers, who were forced to face a frightening reality: invisible radiation. Lack of proper equipment. The liquidators were sent to the Chernobyl exclusion zone without any proper training on the dangers of radiation. Many of them were dressed in regular clothes and, at best, used improvised equipment that barely protected their bodies. Some only wore lead aprons that covered the front of their bodies, leaving their backs and other areas exposed. Radiation did not discriminate. It penetrated everywhere without asking for permission. And these workers were thrown into the chaos, not knowing what they were truly facing. Extreme work times. The radiation level was so high that workers couldn't be exposed for long. Some liquidators needed to work on-site for only 40 seconds before being replaced. Yes, 40 seconds. Time was so critical that work teams were constantly rotated, but even so, many developed severe illnesses. The repeated exposure to accumulated radiation over time left irreparable marks on the health of many. Some became sick immediately, while others took years to notice the devastating effects. Lack of information and protection. What makes this story even more tragic is that many of the liquidators had no idea what they were facing. They were treated as heroes without knowing the deadly risk they were taking. There was insufficient information about the danger of radiation, and Soviet authorities continued to downplay the severity of the situation. The government tried to hide the truth not only from the population, but also from those on the front lines. The lack of proper protection, the unawareness of radiation effects, and misinformation resulted in a tragedy within a tragedy. Forgotten heroes. Many of these workers died weeks or months after exposure, with symptoms of intense radiation: nausea, hair loss, internal bleeding, and multiple organ failure. The cruelest part? Many of these heroes never received proper recognition. Although some were honored and their actions celebrated, most liquidators died without any compensation. Their families were left unsupported, with little to no financial or psychological help. And even today, many of these workers are still forgotten. They faced radiation to save lives, but the system that should have protected and supported them abandoned them. The forbidden photos of Chernobyl. Right after the accident, photographers tried to capture what was left of the plant. But there was a problem. The radiation damaged the camera films. The first images taken were dark blurs, full of interference. To this day, there is a debate about which was the first real photo of Chernobyl. Some were taken by soldiers who were on site trying to contain the radiation. Others were taken by journalists who managed to enter the area a few days later. The scariest part? Many of these photographers died within a few months due to intense radiation exposure, effect of radiation on species. Now, let me ask you a question that few people consider. How many other truths are still buried in the Chernobyl exclusion zone? And more importantly, how many of these truths will never come to our knowledge? The exclusion zone became a true open-air laboratory, and nature, as bizarre as it may seem, ended up being one of the biggest victims. Mutation in animals. Some wolves and wild boars inhabiting the region have developed an impressive resistance to radiation, while others have suffered bizarre genetic mutations. Red forest. The trees near the reactor turned red and died quickly due to extreme radiation. The soil in the area is still highly contaminated to this day. Growing animal population. Without human presence, the fauna multiplied. Wolves, lynxes, bison, and even wild horses started living in the zone. And the most impressive thing is that the fauna survived despite the radioactive contamination. And now I ask you, how many other truths were hidden from us? How many secrets are still buried in that ghost town? The Chernobyl disaster changed the world. But what really frightens is realizing that often, the greatest tragedies are not only caused by technical failures, but by human decisions. If this video shocked you, don't forget to like and share it with your friends. Subscribe to the channel so you won't miss any content like this. And tell me in the comments, did you already know these secrets about Chernobyl? What impressed you the most about this story? See you in the next video. It was the early hours of April 26, 1986. The Chernobyl nuclear power plant, located in the former Soviet Union, was operating as usual. But an error in the safety test resulted in a catastrophic explosion in reactor number 4. The impact was so strong that the 1,200-ton reactor roof was launched into the air,